Hello, and welcome to the Brain Dump Podcast. I am Sandy Boone, your host, and I'm going to start today with telling you a little bit about who I am, what I do, my credentials, what I'm passionate about, and where I envision this podcast going. As I mentioned, my name is Sandy Boone. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I am a university professor, and I also own Sandy Boone Coaching and Consulting. Life began for me in a very interesting way. I was raised by a single mom, and she and I kind of grew up together. So I have been a little adult most of my life, and that led me to a space of making pretty responsible decisions when I was graduating high school. I decided to go into the medical field because there's always job security in the medical field. And so I became an x ray tech. And as I was finishing up my x ray degree, I knew that this wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. The human body fascinated me. The x ray aspect of it felt very repetitive to me. So once I had mastered the most difficult positions in a hospital, I quickly got bored and I left those jobs. Looking back, I realize now that it was my adult diagnosed ADHD at its finest. And so I felt a lot of shame really for staying in those jobs for such short amounts of time. Anyway, as I got older, graduated school, did the things, I met my husband and we got married, and we knew that our intention was to have children at some point, and that working in the hospitals, which are open 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, that wasn't really conducive to family life. So I had an opportunity to go and work in a doctor's office. And working at that doctor's office really changed the trajectory of my life. For those of you who have ever been in a doctor's office type environment, everybody does a little bit of everything. And so the x-ray position in that office was only part-time. And so the other half of my job was spent assisting the doctor. I had an opportunity to learn how to do lots of cool medical things. There was a lab in the office. And so I learned how to interpret lab results. And I say that loosely. Of course, I'm not a doctor, but I learned what would be concerning and what I needed to pay attention to. And in assisting the doctor, part of my job was to bring to their attention the labs that were abnormal so that something could be done before the end of the day, which potentially would send someone to the hospital. So I worked in that doctor's office for a number of years, and then my husband and I decided it was time to have a child. And in my house, we call that the nightmare pregnancy. Things did not go as expected. I ended up on bed rest, and the bed rest started in May, and I did not deliver until August. So I had many months flat on my back in the bed and lots of time to think, but that's a story for another day. And when I went back to work after my son was born, everything turned out fine. He's healthy and doing great, all the things. But when I went back to work, I had an opportunity to decide whether I would go back doing exactly what I was doing or if I would go back in a different space. And so the different space that was offered was half x-ray, which is the same thing I was doing before I left. And the other half was clinical pharmaceutical research. And there was a big draw to that. It offered me flexibility with a newborn. It offered a scheduled day versus kind of putting out fires as they come up. And so I took that path. And eventually I became a full-time research coordinator. The x-ray part was delegated to somebody else. And so that began my career in clinical research. It was a good career. It was interesting. It was fascinating. It stimulated my ADHD brain. One of the things that came up in that was that enough of research stayed the same, that I knew what I was doing, but enough changed so that it kept me stimulated. From there, I went to work at another doctor's office where I had the opportunity to actually work for the president of the American College of Gastroenterology. He was wanting to start his own research entity. And so he did not have any research going on. And so it was a good fit. I went to work for him and started the research industry or started the research entity in his office. I stayed there for a number of years. Eventually, we welcomed our second child, a daughter, by adoption. And eventually, I left there and I went to women's health. Throughout that whole progression, I learned a lot. Um, there was definitely a shift in the pharmaceutical industry from when I started to when I stopped. Also, during that time frame, pharmaceutical companies were allowed to start making commercials. So there definitely was a shift from health management, health care. We want you to be healthy. Let's take care of you to more profit driven motives. I tell people often that the pharmaceutical industry can be every bit as slimy as you've heard that it is. There's lots of things that go on behind the scenes, and when money is our driver, that's what we get. So, um, again, a conversation for another day. Maybe we'll talk about that one day. But I had gone as far in clinical research as I could go. And at this point, I had been in the medical field about 15 years. And so I was going to have to go back to school because my x-ray degree was an associate's degree. So to move forward in clinical research, I had to go back and get a bachelor's degree. And I decided at that point that if I were going to go back to school, I was going to go back to school and do what I wanted to do. And it wasn't pharmaceutical research. So I decided to go back to school to become a counselor. And I tell people often that I took the scenic route to become a mental health counselor. And while the scenic route was not easy, it did make me everything that I am today. And I don't really regret doing that. It provided lots of opportunity, it provided lots of knowledge, and it really helped me realize who I am as a person and what I value. So, fast forward to working on a bachelor's degree while working, while mothering two children, and while being a wife. I look back at that and I still am not sure how I pulled that off other than just pure survival, but I did it. And I had learned during my course of time in clinical research that there was a mind body connection. And I knew that my patients got better because of the relationship that we had. Um, One of the things that happens in the pharmaceutical industry is if the patients don't complete the study, you get data, but you don't get all the data you had hoped to get. So part of my job was patient retention. And one of the ways to retain patients is to get to know them, to talk to them, to learn about their grandchildren, to, support them in the loss of their spouse. Um, that nurturing piece that we really don't have time for in the medical field anymore. And sometimes I think back about that and I think about it started so that my patients would finish the trial, but it was who I was. It didn't have to be faked. I was there for my people. And there was a loyalty there between me and them. And, one of the things I learned quickly was if it was a research study that I myself wouldn't do, I had a really hard time selling it to a client. So, or to a patient rather. So, I still feel like I kept my ethics, even when it was hard. And there were times it really was. I had multiple pharmaceutical companies tell me that um, I had a really high placebo rate. And so the further I got into research, I mean, research studies are supposed to be blinded, but it wasn't lost on me that I had more patients on drug than on placebo most of the time, especially towards the end. And again, maybe it was random, but the conspiracy theorist in me says not. Um, But I learned that brain body connection, and I learned that connection makes things better. And by connection making things better, I'm talking about the connection between two people. So, went to get my bachelor's. knowing that grad school would be after that, that was just my focus. And I went to school at night. I did the things I had to do. I graduated with my bachelor's degree. I did not participate in my graduation from with my bachelor's degree because the school that I attended only had one graduation a year. It was in May. I finished school in December and I was almost 6 months into my master's by the time graduation rolled around. And it just kind of felt pointless to do it at that point. And I had interviewed at a local graduate program that it was a faith-based program. And I was in. They had told me that I had to take the GRE and that they didn't care if I just wrote my name on it and turned it in, that um, I just had to take it, but that I had already met the criteria to get into the program. So I was online one day searching out information. I was actually looking for a dual enrollment for my son because he was in high school at that point. And I came across an ad for Wake Forest University. And I saw that they had just started an online counseling program. There was a lot of draw to this. One, it offered flexibility so that I could continue working and being mom and doing all the things. And two, for those of you that don't know, Wake Forest is considered the Ivy League of the South. And so it was a very prestigious university. I applied to Wake Forest, really thinking I didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting in. It's funny, I really didn't consider myself to be that smart until I got into grad school at Wake Forest, but I applied. And of course, part of grad school, you have to take the GRE. So I was scheduled to take the GRE in like 2 weeks. And remember, the other school was saying, just write your name on it. So I wasn't really studying because I just had to write my name on it. Well, Wake Forest had a score. Like they wanted me to do well. And I don't even remember what that number was at this point. I needed to do the best I could do. So I went totally into study mode. And I am happy to report that I did very well. Wake Forest had told me this was the score to aim for. And just before I hit submit, I thought, well, it's up to God or the universe or whatever you believe in, whether this happens or not, because I have not prepped for this test like I would have liked to when I knew if I knew the score mattered. And so when I submitted my test, my score was 1 point over what Wake had told me I needed to get in. So when I got back to my car, Wake called to see how I had done on my exam. And I told them. And the person said, "What?" And I repeated it. And she said, "Wow." And I said, "Well, you said I needed to make this score. Like I just barely made over that." And she said, "Yeah, but nobody makes that high." So I think that speaks more to my ability to take a test than my intelligence, but I did it. And so I was admitted to Wake Forest University, and I am very proud of that accomplishment. Go Deeks. Um, I I love my experience there. It was an incredible program. One of the things that I liked about Wake was that every class we had two professors. We had a professor that had a PhD in counselor education, and we had a professor that was like in the trenches. So like this is how academia looks in the field. And that is actually what I do at Wake Forest now. I am the practitioner that's in the field, and I love that work. I love pouring into new clinicians. I love seeing how they grow along the way. And, again, it's a student population that is probably the upper crust, and they're just so motivated, and the work is incredible. Teaching the nuances and the art of counseling. Um, that's some of my most meaningful work. So that's that part of me. The next part of me is Sandy Boone Coaching and Consulting. And I started Sandy Boone Coaching and Consulting so that I could put all of those things that don't fall under my license in that space. And it has evolved over the years. It has really, at first it was just speaking engagements, then it became I sold some retail under it. There were just various things that have fallen under that. And now in this new advent, I'm realizing that I really like to work with therapists. I know that in my counseling job as well. I specialize in healing the healer. But there's something about that practical application. And again, this piggybacks with my work at Wake, right? There's something about this is how this really works. And this is how to make life easier and work harder or work smarter, not harder. And so, really having that space that offers freedom is super important to me. Um, all the time, I get people reaching out to me about how do I come off of insurance panels, or I want to start a private practice. How do I do that? Or how do I take care of myself? And often the biggest thing I get is I know that talk therapy is not working. What else can I do? And so that's where I've really narrowed down the work that I want to do with Sandy Boone Coaching and Consulting. I want to support the therapist that knows talk therapy isn't working, the therapist that knows they're teetering on burnout because they're not getting, or maybe they're even burned out because they're not getting the results in the therapy room that they know that they can get. They just don't know how to get them. It's the therapist that says, how can I help my clients when I can't help myself? In the therapy world, we really like that self-care words like that. Get self-care, get self-care, get self-care. But that's not massages and rainbows and unicorns and Skittles. There's a lot more to that. And many of us who go into the field are wounded healers, and we're doing our own work. And really, since the advent of COVID, we have we've been living what our clients are living, and what we're sharing is what we're doing to help ourselves. And quite frankly, sometimes we don't even know how to help ourselves. So how are we supposed to help our clients? So at this point, I feel like Sandy Boone Coaching and Consulting is to really hone in on that population, to create a community of people that just want a safe space to land, a community of people that want to take more of a functional medicine approach to helping themselves and helping their clients. One of the things that I say to my clients in practice is I don't ask them to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. And so in that realm, of course, I don't carry necessarily a diagnosis that my client carries, but I'm not going to ask you to do coping skills that I'm not willing to do or coping skills that don't work. And so I am carrying that forward into helping the healer from a business perspective and how to take care of themselves and to look at root cause and to look at the functional medicine aspect of things. That's another piece that I left out before is I am a functional medicine provider. I'm a student at the School of Applied Functional Medicine, and I've been on this journey of root cause medicine for myself for the last 5 years, and I have learned a lot. Um, and because research about the body and the brain continues to evolve, I'm never going to be the expert of all of it. But what I do know is I stay on top of the research, and the things that I offer to my clients, they find help. And we create a partnership where we're figuring it out together, and you get the support that you need. I am really passionate about root cause and neuroanatomy and all things brain. I told a student just last week that when I learned about the brain the first time, we did not think it was plastic. We thought that however your brain wired, it was stuck. That's the way it was, and you couldn't change it. Now there's all this information about neuroplasticity and how we can change our brains. And I've started offering neurofeedback both to my Foothold Counseling clients and my Sandy Boone Coaching and Consulting clients because we can change our brains. We can do things outside of changing our thoughts that actually have impact and change the way we see the world. This is super exciting to me. I can geek out about that all day. I probably will at some point in this podcast multiple times because that's who I am. And in working with a colleague of mine, we were talking and I said something offhand. I don't even remember now what it was. And she's like, "What?" And I said it again. And she said, "Oh, I didn't know that." And so that's another piece that I've realized that people don't know what I know, but I come from this place of I know it, they know it, and that's just not the case. And so that's part of what this podcast is going to be about is teaching the things that I know that I thought everybody knew because I knew, but now I'm realizing, hey, the experience is not the same. Like my experience is not the same as everyone else. And I have a lot to offer and I can save people a lot of time because I know things that I've researched. And again, that body-based approach with that medical background, I say it to people in a way that makes sense. And when people understand, then it allows them to make decisions going forward so that it doesn't create a dependent relationship. Like, here's the information that you need to know so that you can make the decisions going forward. My goal is never to create dependence upon me, either in my counseling clients or my coaching clients, but to give them the information that they need so that they can make decisions for themselves and have the best life that they can have. So the evolution of this podcast, um, I don't know where this is going to go. Over the last few weeks, since I've decided that I wanted to get into the podcast world, I've thought about what my topics could be. My aim is to make the podcast about 20 minutes long so that it's long enough that there's a train of thought, but short enough that it will fit into a busy day. Because most people that reach out to me are incredibly busy. And so they don't have time for an hour and a half podcast. It's just not a thing. So I'm just going to talk about what's on my mind or explain um, something I learned. Or um, certainly I'll take any, if you know of something that you want me to talk about, let me know. I'll be glad to go there. And so this is this is going to be a growth thing for me, and it's going to be about owning who I am and owning how I show up in the world and owning who I can help because like probably many of you, I've underestimated what I'm capable of. And so it's all about healing. It's all about doing the work and it's about living the best life that you can live. So that's who I am. That's where we're going. Those are the things I'm passionate about. If you like what you hear, um, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Facebook. You'll find Foothold Counseling. You'll find Sandy Boone Coaching and Consulting. And yeah, let's do this thing, y'all. So until next time, take care of yourself, be kind to those around you, and know that you're not alone.